Hello and welcome back to the Transfer Show, brought to you by IG Trading and Investments, the show where we debate the latest links, deals and rumours taking place across the January transfer window. We've got a big episode for you today, as with Liam Rosenior in place at Chelsea, having already taken charge of his first game, and Michael Carrick set to be appointed as Man United's interim coach ahead of the Manchester derby on the weekend. We're going to be taking a look at what Man United and Chelsea need to do to secure that all-important Champions League place. And to discuss that, I'm joined by two of the very best, Nieve and David Ornstein. Thanks for joining us once again. Stick around to the end for this week's smartest investment, brought to you by IG. But without further ado, let's get into it. And the hot topic right now is Michael Carrick to Man United. Now, David, you were on the show last week. We were discussing the next permanent Man United manager, so we won't get into that. But I think when we were filming this last week, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer looked like the favourite to take over as interim. What's changed since then, and what are the expectations for Michael Carrick coming into Man United for the rest of the season?
Well, I'm not sure Ole was the favourite.
Okay.
He was a strong contender, as was Michael Carrick, but it seemed that Ole, with his background of having been the interim and permanent manager previously, and had some success initially before it went wrong, and being such an iconic figure from within Manchester United's history, garnered a bit more traction and publicity. But Carrick was always there and had a lot of favour among members of the Manchester United and INEOS hierarchy for what he did in a short stint with Ole. He was his assistant, and then once Ole departed and he took over on an interim basis himself, and then he's gone away to Middlesbrough and learned his trade. He's a really popular character. He's said to be a very good coach. And I think Ole represented to Manchester United's hierarchy a lot of what had happened previously, of course, because of his background, and perhaps some of them felt it was too big a step backwards, with no disrespect to Ole at all, and Carrick less so. Also, I think from Ole's perspective, and it kind of came out in reporting, that he was very keen to see this as more of a permanent thing, because he is a manager in his own right. He's done this very job in his own right, so going back to having him at the same club as an interim may have jarred with some, including him. And I think he sees this from the conversations I've had as being a longer term project that he would love to get his teeth stuck into, a real rebuild over years rather than just 4 months. And I think Michael Carrick was very willing to take it on the basis of 4 months. There were other names in the frame like Ruud van Nistelrooy, but those two were always at the forefront, and ultimately Carrick has edged it. Now, what's really interesting is the backroom staff that's emerging pretty much as we record this. So Steve Holland, Gareth Southgate's longtime assistant coach. Johnny Evans, who's already been in there for a period of time. Jonathan Woodgate, who Carrick will know from the scene at Middlesbrough, former Leeds player, whisper it to Manchester United fans. And then Travis Binion, who can help bridge the gap or the pathway from the under-21s because he's coached there, with Darren Fletcher going back to be the under-18s coach, which I think is largely his choice. So it's a really fascinating dynamic. Many people have said, will Wayne Rooney go in? As I understand it, Wayne Rooney would do anything, as he's kind of pointed out in his own podcast, to help Manchester United and assist in their rebuild to try and bring them back to the top. But it's Carrick and those we've just mentioned there. It's a big call for Manchester United over a crucial period of time. They've only got the Premier League to focus on. And then on the horizon will come the permanent appointment. But yeah, it's not Ole at the wheel, it's Michael at the wheel. And from what I hear, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer supports that wholeheartedly. They're very close, and he's right behind Michael to try and steady the ship and take United forward.
Yeah, certainly an interesting time, especially with that Steve Holland appointment. Very, quite taken by surprise by that when that news dropped. And you mentioned Van Nistelrooy as well being in the picture there. I mean, Carrick, of course, has already taken on, a caretaker role like you mentioned in the past. He is one of 5 Fergie-era United players to have taken charge of United at some point in the last, 12, 13 years now. Which is pretty amazing. I mean, Nieve, what do you make of the Carrick appointment? Were you, from a United perspective, do you prefer that over Ole not going back to what they knew before? Do you think he's capable of getting him into the Champions League? And if Are there any transfers as well that you think could help Michael Carrick secure that Champions League place?
Yeah, I think it sounds like there's a real good support system and network behind it, which I think is crucial, and it won't feel like one manager at the top who might feel left hung out to dry at the club, which is essential. It'd be very interesting to know what is fully going on honestly in Carrick's head in terms of a long-term, how he views that. What do you see happening in the next couple of years, and what conversations have been had. But I'd say in terms of transfers, yeah, they definitely can be made. I think the areas that scream out to me are, I think central midfield. I think central midfield's a really good place to start, just because it's also something that's sort of low risk in the sense of it's a transfer that I think would benefit them under whatever direction they then go on beyond the end of the season. I'd look in that midfield area and think if they can get someone who's maybe a little bit better on the ball than Ugarte, but has got that tenacity and tackling. Perhaps maybe somebody like Ederson, or I know that Tottenham have looked into Conor Gallagher now, but someone like that for sure. Elliott Anderson, for example, is another option, and I think that would benefit them massively. And the fullback area as well, because now we don't know what they're sort of going to do in terms of what they're going to demand of their sort of wide fullback players, and how many of them will play on the pitch as well, and how will that impact someone like Ahmad, for example. So I think it's important just to figure out how they're going to play on the pitch, who's going to play where, and then take it from there in terms of making the signings, of filling in the gaps, and then not just bringing players in for the sake of it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you mentioned Ederson there. He seems largely to be seen as a kind of cheaper alternative to someone like Elliott Anderson and Adam Wharton, who both English Premier League players who are going to cost. Looks like they would cost a lot of money, whether it be in January, seems unlikely, but the summer certainly. As a dedicated Serie A fan, what is it about Ederson that you feel fits Man United so well?
I think he'd be a great sort of facilitator player in terms of box to box, covering a lot of area, and perhaps maybe then getting a little bit more out of the players around that are currently at Manchester United, players like Bruno and Mason Mount, and I think it would help even Casemiro as well, having someone like him next to him. So I think, for me, sometimes it's about adding someone who can just balance a team out but not reduce the quality too much of the football, so I think he would do that.
I mean, David, I'll throw it to you now. We've heard some suggestions about transfers. Is there any possibility that United go into the market in January, or is the plan still very much to save everything until the summer and kind of continue the rebuilding project from there?
Yeah, I've just realised I sat on here last week, the transfers show, and talked about what transfers will not be happening at Manchester United. And you're right, there have been some reports that have come out since to suggest that Michael Carrick could be backed in the market if long-term targets become available now, which a lot of clubs might be looking to do in the month of January going into February. I'd be a little bit surprised if they weren't prepared to back Ruben Amorim in the winter market, which is what Amorim himself said. And then an interim comes in and they suddenly start spending, and that interim then leaves at the end of the season, and there's a new head coach who comes in. One thing I would say is that United, if they're as well set up as they should be, and implementing this more modern sort of continental model that you see elsewhere, the director of football, the sporting director, the director of recruitment, and the recruitment staff should be across these transfer targets throughout the year, and they should be planning around the style of football that they want to implement, irrespective of the head coach. But I'll put the caveat in that the head coach or manager is such an important voice in that. We see it at Arsenal, at Manchester City, at Liverpool, at Newcastle, and elsewhere. I'm still expecting it to be a very quiet January winter market. Apologies, Manchester United fans. I don't think that they're looking to do anything significant. Don't forget that they are only competing for a top four place now. No cups at all, so they've got very few matches. They've got a lot of time to prepare, to work on the players that they've already brought to the club, the new 3 attackers. They've got relatively new players in other positions like Lenny Yoro and Dorgu, for example, Lamans at the back. There will be players returning from AFCON, from injury. Let's see if Kobbie Mainoo gets more game time in the second half of the season under a coach in Michael Carrick, who has spoken very well of him and of academy talent. Do they use more young players than we saw from the academy, than Ruben Amorim gave opportunities to, as they look towards the future? And then how intense are they keeping their powder dry, and then addressing that priority position that Nieve mentioned of central midfield in the summer, when those players are more readily available than they are now. Finances are easier then than they are now. And so I think that will be the focus for Manchester United, almost preparing the groundwork on and off the pitch for a summer assault on the market, like with many clubs. And this is really a period where they try and bring some smiles back onto faces, some belief back into the players and the camp. It had developed quite negatively, and there was a pessimism that had kind of enveloped the club towards the end of Amorim's reign, and sort of culminated in a disagreement and argument between himself and Jason Wilcox. There was his comments about some of the young players at the club, and we heard in reports in the days after he left that, you know, that the existing players, some senior players, had kind of lost faith in him, or felt that he had lost faith in them. So now is a time for Manchester to reunite in terms of the club. And Carrick, they wanted the coach to come in who had a real connection with the club, and to try and instill some of that sort of ethos back into it and lift the place. And I think that's what the priority will be now, because there is a lot of quality there, and then see how they can build the squad going forward.
Yeah, certainly is a big job, given how poor the results have been, haven't improved under Darren Fletcher. But like you say, it feels a little bit akin to when Ollie took over from Jose Mourinho back in 2018, just having that familiar face, someone who can kind of lift the spirits, bring confidence back to the players.
Also a bit more simplicity.
Yeah.
They were trying to implement a 3 at the back under Ruben Amorim. It became such a talking point, and then he tinkered with 4 at the back, which so many people were baying for. Then he went back to 3 at the back, and it seems to be one of the many factors that caused the flare-up between himself and the club. I suspect, as we saw with Fletcher at Burnley in his first game in charge, and then against Brighton in his second, not back to basics, but a 4 that suits the players at his disposal, and maybe less experimentation with trying to implement what Amorim had been trying to do, and play to their strengths and try and get through this season, try and get that top 4 position, qualification for the Champions League, which is their stated aim, and then they'll hope, not for the first time, that they can usher in better times ahead.
Yeah, and what a first test on the weekend against Man City. And like you mentioned earlier, Mbeumo could be back for that game, Ahmad as well. I think Matthijs de Ligt is the only major injury in that squad now. Let's move on to Chelsea now. I mean, Liam Rosenior has now got his feet under the table, took charge of his first game on the weekend, that 5-1 win over Charlton. He watched that 2-1 loss to Fulham last week. Let's start off with some transfer suggestions, Nieve. Having watched Chelsea this season, having seen the breakdown under Enzo Maresca, are there any areas of that Chelsea squad that you think need upgrading now or in the summer? Where would you be looking to strengthen for Rosenior? It's
a good one. I think it'll be interesting to see where there might be a bit of pressure to play riskier football, because I didn't know too much about Liam Rosenior, but from recently looking at a few of the Strasbourg games and looking at some of the sort of stats around it, it would appear that even at Strasbourg there's a lot of high risk involved in a lot of the football. So going back to the 3-3 draw against PSG are a team that, of all teams, that you push and press high and take those risks, that really is a risk, but they did that. And then also in a lot of games you'll see the goalkeeper is quite particularly high as well, and involved in the build-up play. And actually they're top of Ligue 1 for touches in their own third, and a big part of that is the fact that they like to sort of build it up, patience sort of around the central area defensively, and then sort of pounce. And I do think that it suits what Chelsea have got, but there are a couple of improvements that could take it to a whole new level. So for example, perhaps a centre-back that they could bring in who maybe feels a bit more comfortable, isn't going to get bullied sort of off the ball. Because I think against any team, Chelsea can go toe-to-toe under Maresca, and I think from a position of he was a very proactive manager who'd like to make tweaks within the game, within the 90 minutes, to sort of put players in positions and bait the opposition and create space, and therefore he could get results against anyone, including PSG. But then sort of the week in, week out against maybe the lower half teams where there's a lot of physicality, where it's not enjoyable minute by minute, you could get bullied. I noticed that a little bit with Chelsea. So if they could bring someone in, I actually thought someone like a Schlotterbeck is like the perfect world. But then also, I'm really liking Biol at Leeds as well. I think he's got sort of a you shall not pass to him at Leeds. He's really improved them defensively, but he is also really calm on the ball. And I think they could do with a little bit extra composure in that area. And then I was sort of umming and ahhing over the striker and wing position, because I do think that it makes sense, sort of a striker, someone to get into the box, someone to take those chances. It feels like that's the obvious move. But then I sort of looked at Rosenior and what he was doing, and we might end up seeing at Chelsea Cucurella and Malo Gusto. We might see them, and maybe Reece James, if he ended up going back into that role, sort of pushing high up the pitch, and there might end up being that space for the likes of, well, what we're seeing is Garnacho and Neto and Gittins and Estevao, and I just wonder if there's someone they could bring to the table there who could make the most of that, who could be a little bit more clinical with their passing, with their shooting, and just have a little bit more threat to them. And that's where I sort of thought, again, ideal dream world, someone like a Yildiz who's already used to playing tight to a striker and being in those spaces that are just inside. But also Iliman Ndiaye as well at Everton, someone who knows the league well, is really good. He's very fast at breaking out with the ball, dribbling, again, that would suit sort of what would appear to be the way that they could end up playing. So I do think there are a couple of ways they could really elevate it and take it to the next level, Chelsea.
Yeah, I mean, Yildiz and Schlotterbeck, I think Chelsea fans would certainly be happy with those moves. David, I mean, do any of those transfers tickle your fancy if you were, from a Chelsea perspective? How realistic do you think it is that Chelsea go in for star names like that? And also, kind of on Rosenior, we've heard about what his style of play is. How much was Rosenior's style, how much of that was a factor in Chelsea going to hire him? Because obviously we know about the Strasbourg connection, part of the multi-club ownership. The owners know him well, the structure knows, he's well used to the structure there. But yeah, what was the overall thinking behind that appointment?
I'll take your second question first. I feel that when you are hired by Strasbourg, Bluco are looking at you to take the Chelsea job. And it's like a job interview while you're at Strasbourg. So it proved to be the case with Rosenior. It may prove to be the case with Gary O'Neill. We'll have to wait and see. But that's becoming a coveted job, Strasbourg now, for coaches. And then you've got lots of other clubs, including in the Premier League, who are looking at the Strasbourg coaches as potential coaches for them in the future. Because if you're good enough for Chelsea, and you get to work with that sort of recruitment and quality of players, and you can say what you want about Ligue 1, but it's clearly attractive because many of the clubs I'm speaking to are looking at Strasbourg and saying that's pretty impressive what's going on there. So they would have had a long time, 18 months, to look at how he played his football. Nieve talked much better than I could about his build-up play, and I mean it's the youngest team in Europe, isn't it, that they're playing at Strasbourg. So using a lot of young players, and I mean I can't overstate how much cross-pollination there is between the two clubs in that ownership group. You've got Andre Santos, who has been between the two. You've got, even on visits from the hierarchy towards Strasbourg, Levi Colwill went with them, and the sporting directors, when you're talking about the likes of Lawrence Stewart and Paul Winstanley, Joe Shields and Sam Jewell, and now you've got David Weir in the mix as well. They're all sharing ideas and styles of play and philosophies and recruitment. It's a very joined up approach, and it looks to be going okay so far. It is gaining a lot of scrutiny, understandably so, but still really early days. And so, they will have analysed his methodology much better than me, and they seem absolutely sold on him. And a lot of people I speak to in football are majorly impressed with Liam Rosenior as a coach, as a student of the game, as somebody who is very clear in what he wants to do and has been for pretty much his whole life. This is his dream, in his own words. He seems a very impressive character, very assured and confident. I know people have been mocking some of his public comments and comparing him to David Brent. I take a very different stance on that. He's really blown me away on the way he's conducted himself. He's held court in his news conferences, translation of his ideas. The very early noises we're getting from the training ground is that the atmosphere is great. The players really respect him, which was one of the big questions initially. How can he command a dressing room of these egos and these transfer fees and their status in the game, World Cup winners and players who have commanded prices in excess of £100 million? And we can't judge just yet, is the truth, but the early rumblings would be positive from Chelsea's perspective. I'll then throw it over to your initial question about the recruitment. I think Chelsea will be looking in that attacking area again, so I'm going to take from Nieve, and this is not information, it's just a name I liked, Iliman Ndiaye. He's done so well at Everton and at international level, and he's a real flair player and so creative in different positions. And I do think Chelsea are looking for another versatile attacker. Perhaps that's on the summer agenda, and it may require departures, so let's wait and see what happens around that. Then I do think they're looking for a midfielder as well, again on a similar basis. Let's see what happens in the summer. Unless opportunities arise now that they feel are good enough. And that's because you see the way Enzo Fernandez has been deployed, it's more in the number 10 role. So when you look at Lavia being out injured, it's not as well stocked in that central area as you might imagine. And so I do think an addition there at some point to obviously go with Caicedo and their other resources. And maybe a priority is central defence, and Nieve spoke really well about that. I was at Burnley Man United the other night, and I like the look of Esteve, who's been linked with other Premier League clubs. The fans at Turf Moor love him, and he can bring the ball out from the back. He's very commanding, a leader. He plays with a greater maturity than his age. He's a presence aerially, he's physically tough and imposing. Chelsea have long been linked with the likes of Murillo, Marc Guéhi. I don't think they'd be in the mix for Marc Guéhi this time round. Murillo, let's wait and see, because those links have never gone away. And they've got Mamadou Sarr coming in from Strasbourg, so that's another example of the link-up. He can play across, whether it be right, central or left. And so I think those are the positions that they've got on their agenda going forward. Will they escalate any of that and fast-track it to January? That will depend on opportunities and availability and price points. It wouldn't surprise me if they did. We've seen them do it in the past. But I think they're sort of 2026 targets, whether it be January or the summer. Yeah. And therefore the recruitment at Chelsea just continues. But under Liam Rosenior, I think they feel they've got somebody that is absolutely on the same wavelength of them, which understandably wasn't necessarily the case with Maresca because he was coming in from Leicester. But you've got a model there that was designed for exactly this. So this is the first attempted proof of concept.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, you mentioned Sarr and Santos, Omega coming in from Strasbourg in the summer. Of course, already has that relationship with Rosenior. Was it 14 goals in Ligue 1 last year? I also wonder whether Mike Penders, who's been starting for Strasbourg this year, whether he returns from loan and then has a role in the squad. I mean, only 20 years old, Mike Penders, the goalkeeper. So yeah, I wonder whether it's too big a step at this point for a young goalkeeper, but he certainly impressed a lot for Strasbourg this season. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. What do you make of Liam Rosenior? How confident are you that Chelsea can get into the Carabao Cup final as well? Of course, that's taking place this week too. And to finish the show this week, we are wrapping up with our smartest investments, brought to you by IG. This is the most intelligent piece of business, or rumoured piece of business, that we've seen from the last 7 days. I'll throw it to you, Nieve. What's caught your eye this week?
I very much like the Conor Gallagher Tottenham, getting involved with that. I do think, especially at home, Tottenham have sort of got into this situation where maybe they've lacked a little bit of bite and the opposition have found it a bit comfortable just to hold on to the ball, almost make it their home stadium. And I think to the signing of Palhinha and sort of the effect that had, and I think this could have sort of a similar effect in terms of that raising that sort of standard and movement and tenacity in the team. So I think that's a really cool move.
Yeah, I like it too, especially now with Bentancur out, I think, for the rest of the season. Certainly needed another body in midfield. David, what's caught your eye this week?
I was going to say Tati at West Ham. I like how he took to his task against QPR. He could become a bit of a cult hero there at a difficult time for the club. I was also thinking the Tammy Abraham possibility to Aston Villa. He's been there on loan before, and I really want to see if Tammy Abraham can do it back in the Premier League again. I'm sure he can. But I am going to go for a diverse one, and it is Alexander Toth, who is a Hungarian central midfielder, 20 years old, Hungary international. I think he's got the highest value of any player from the Hungarian league on transfer market ever. It's not enormous by Premier League standards, but that just shows he's a real talent. Bournemouth, looking at him, then there's a few clubs on the continent too. We included it in the Athletic deal sheet. I think some others have reported it too. Sky Sports themselves were the first to mention him. And I'd really like to see that deal happen, wherever it may be. And Toth, from people I speak to, is a real prospect of high calibre. Of course, he got his chance at Ferencváros under Robbie Keane. That's the one I'm going to go for this week, a bit left field.
I'll finish off with an outgoing actually from the Premier League, Arno Calumwendo to Frankfurt on loan from Nottingham Forest. Yeah, I was really disappointed actually by Calumwendo's move to Nottingham Forest. Arrived for fairly big money, 17 goals in Ligue 1 last season. He came up through the PSG academy as well. But as disappointed as I was by Nottingham Forest's, how it turned out for him at Nottingham Forest, the move to Frankfurt seemed as exciting as it can get really for a young French forward. You see what they did with Kolo Muani, what they did with Hugo Ekitike. They ended up getting, I think, 190 million euros for the pair of them. So yeah, Calumwendo I think has the potential to rip up the Bundesliga. But that's all we have time for on the Transfer Show, brought to you by IG Trading and Investments for this week. Let us know your thoughts about Michael Carrick and Liam Rosenior in the comments below. Thanks, David, for joining us once again.
It's a pleasure.
Thanks, Nieve, for coming on. And we'll see you next week.